ovation to the stage. He has a provocative title, so I want to lead. Can I just lead your provocative title with? So he's going to give you a provocative title. I want to give you one provocative thing first. So this is what I want you to remember when you see his. So what does it say? So this is what you want to commit yourself to, but he will lead us a little bit more on investing with a provocative title. So Marko, please.
Thank you. Please have a seat. So yeah, as Bill said, it's kind of a provocative title. It's fundraising fuck-ups. But before I start, I want to thank Burak, Asli, and the rest of the team for bringing me over. I've never been to Istanbul, so I'm having a really wonderful time so far. So thank you so much for doing that. But the reason why I'm here is to basically bring a bunch of kind of tactical advice and tactical stuff that I've seen, that we've seen in Techstars over the last 7, 8, 10 years about fundraising and what are the fuck-ups or mistakes that the companies kind of make whilst going through the fundraising process. A bit about me. So I'm a program director at Techstars London. I'm originally from Croatia. I've come to Techstars 4 years ago, have been an associate first, then a program manager, now program director. Originally, as I said, I'm from Croatia, so I worked for a media company in Croatia. We covered startups and tech. Then I helped start the first incubator in Zagreb, so that was quite exciting. I also started my company, so TimePrep. We did an iOS time management app for CFA candidates, so kind of in the finance world for the education, and then eventually I landed in Techstars. A bit about Techstars. So we are the worldwide network that helps entrepreneurs succeed. And there's now 45 programs around the world that Techstars runs. They are spread all over. From 20 of them are in the US, from New York, Boston, Chicago, Boulder, and other cities, to then in Europe there's London, there's Berlin, there's Oslo, there's Paris, there's Tel Aviv, and a bunch of others that are coming. The differences between the 40, there's kind of two types of programs that we run. One are city programs, so those are programs that are sector agnostic. They would basically accept and they would invest in all the companies regardless of the stages and the sectors. But then on top of that, there's the corporate programs, so the programs that focus on a particular niche, such as fintech with Barclays, such as retail with Metro and Target, such as automotive with Ford and Honda in Detroit, music with Sony, Warner, Sonos in LA. So there's a bunch of kind of corporate ones that are focusing on that particular niche and that provide clear industry insights and industry experience from that corporate partner and their best practices, obviously. So it gets quite helpful towards the company that's an early stage company that's still trying to figure out if actually what they're trying to solve, what they're solving, is actually the thing that the industry needs, and has it been done before, and if they need more help about that. I've run 5 programs so far in London. The whole London portfolio is 70 companies, but all the companies with an asterisk basically raised funding. So I can say we kind of know what we're kind of talking about, I guess. Just to give you kind of a bit of a context, so the companies that went through the program last year, so in 2017, that closed the program in October, I think 9 out of 11 raised additional funding, so follow-on funding. Companies that went through the program in 2016, again, 9 out of 11 raised additional funding, follow-on funding, and there's now first companies from 2016 are knocking on the Series A kind of stage because they grew and they're growing. So to be quite specific and go into kind of the fundraising process and fundraising tips and fuck-ups, the whole thing will be basically driven from the founder's perspective, and the thoughts that I'll share here are initially the thoughts that that the founders have, and then we'll kind of dig into each of those and kind of potentially debate them. But before I kick off, let me just understand who's in the room. So who has a company, who has a startup, who's here to fundraise, who's here to build kind of those relationships that Bill mentioned as well. Who's a CEO, who's a founder? Raise your hand. Okay, so that's great. It's going to be quite useful. Well, hopefully it's going to be quite useful. So when a company kind of figures out, oh, I need to fundraise, I need to kick off my fundraising process, everyone assumes, oh, it's going to be roses and rainbows, and it's going to be it's going to be a walk in the park. The reality is it's kind of like this. So there's bombs, there's dragons, there's hills, and it gets quite bumpy. And it kind of shouldn't be. There's a clear number of clear things that you can basically remove in order to remove the mistakes, in order to remove the steps that other people have taken that led them to basically fail in the fundraising process. So we have kind of a timeline from 0 to some capital, and the timeline kind of goes when a company says, oh, maybe I should kind of start to fundraise. And that's true, sure, if you are a company and if you don't have if you don't have revenue, if you don't have current capital that can support you and your company and the team, then probably, yeah, it would make sense to go and fundraise and get additional capital and sell your part of the company for a certain part of equity, or give away a certain part of equity. But if you do have revenue, if you do have positive cash flow, then don't fundraise. Like, that's not always the option. When you look at all the media out there, there's all these news and all these information about, oh, this company raised their Series A, this company raised their Series B, and it's it's portrayed as success. And it is, in a way that it allows that company to go to an additional milestone, but it's actually they gave away 10, 15, 20% of their company for a certain amount of capital, and it's it's great, but it's still like they didn't come to that ultimate success. So what I'm trying to say is, if you do have additional revenue on the side, don't fundraise. It's not the only option. Bootstrap, and bootstrap as long as possible. Build the business on the revenue that you're generating, on the revenue that you're receiving. There will be, unfortunately, some companies, or a lot of companies, that can't get to the growth part without additional capital, but it's not everyone. The other thought that companies have, that CEOs have, is I can start to fundraise anytime. Is it now? Is it a month from now? Is it a month before? Is it during summer? Is it during Christmas? It doesn't matter. It matters a lot, because basically, especially in Europe, basically July and August, all the investors, all the VCs, all the angels, they're off. They're somewhere south of France, they're in Turkey, they're in Croatia, they're on holiday, and they don't care necessarily. They wouldn't respond, they wouldn't be responsive. And if you reach out kind of in June for a meeting and you're waiting, you're following up, and nothing is happening, you basically lost 2 months. And 2 months of the capital, of the burn rate that you have in your company is quite significant. So it also obviously kind of falls into the December timeline, which we're kind of going in now. Everyone who kind of reaches out kind of here, well, even here in November, they won't close in December. Those deals, those investments, those fundraising processes will be pushed to January. Everyone's going to say, oh, you know what, I'll come back to you after Christmas. Oh, let's kind of kick off, but they'll go away kind of on the 15th, and they won't be back until mid-January. The other thing as well is, if you say, I'm going to start fundraising now, there's a bunch of things that you need to have. If you start fundraising now and you have your first meeting, let's say you have a meeting today with an investor, and he says, you know what, I really like what you're doing. Can you send me, the deck? Can you send me the IP agreements? Can you send me all the due diligence stuff? And you're like, oh shit, like I need to go back, and like all these things are pretty much a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3-week tasks that you need to arrange in order to forward and in order to share with the investors. So, and then if you don't have it and the investor is waiting for those 3 weeks, then it's kind of a bad signal. It's like, oh, so he's fundraising, but he's not ready yet. Oh, maybe he's not serious, right? So make sure that when you actually do decide to start to fundraise, to have the, the data room, to have the docs, to have the materials that they will ask you, that the investors will ask you for, ready, so that you can send them, straight off, just after the meeting as a follow-up, saying, hey, we've met XYZ, I really appreciate what you're doing, this is what you asked me for, here's the link, have a look, I would really appreciate your feedback and would really like to follow up, and let's have a follow-on chat next week once you have the time to actually go through the docs. CEOs also say and have the expectation of that they will finish the fundraise in six weeks. What we've seen and what usually kind of in the industry kind of it happens is those 6 weeks are never 6 weeks. The average is from 4 to 6 months from the time you start to have those first conversations. You need, and we'll get to that after, but just from the time perspective, it's 4 to 6 months. It's because of the summer holidays, because of the Christmas holidays, because of everything, because of the things that you need to send over, because of the responsiveness of the investors and your responsiveness and meetings that might, that there are just, there are delays. So if you plan in your budget to have kind of cash in 2 months, then you might be in a very tough position because 2 months will be too short. You'll come to the end of the runway and you'll be like, fuck, I didn't close and I don't have additional capital, so I need to lay off people. So better have a buffer, have an additional buffer of 2 months, 3 months on top of that, rather than to kind of have it very optimistic 2 months and then I'll be done, because that, I mean, it really doesn't happen. Even in the quite fast markets such as the UK, like it just doesn't happen. When CEOs kind of come and start to fundraise, it doesn't always, they always say like, it doesn't matter, I'm just going to have meetings with investors, I'm just going to talk to as many investors as possible. It doesn't matter, if they have capital, I'll talk to them. But the reality is that all investors, even though they do have capital, they're not equal. And they're not equal for a number of reasons, primarily because, so your business might be at a stage where they don't invest. Your business might be located in the area that they don't invest. Your business might be in a sector that they don't understand, that they would never invest, that they can't help you with because you're doing a biotech company and they only know games. And it's a clear mismatch. They don't understand what you're talking about, even though they do have, like they raised a fund, they raised a 50 million fund, and they're investing all over the place, but they're not equal. They're not the same as a biotech investor that you really need for your business, who understands, genomics, who understands the DNA, who understands, who has the pharma connections, who has all these things that can be really, really helpful towards you. So therefore, kind of AngelList and Crunchbase are quite good, resources to tap in and research the investors. On the other side as well, it depends on the business that you can be. So a number of companies potentially, not everyone will be a unicorn, not everyone will be, a $500 million company, and that's okay, right? Like being an entrepreneur, being a CEO, and getting to $100 million company and having it, running it, having 100 people, having revenues that are growing, like that's fine. However, in that case, certain investors might say, oh, that's too small for me because I need to when I invest, I expect to return my fund, and my fund is already, my fund is $1 billion, and I need to return the fund. So one of my portfolio companies will need to, my expectation is that they will be $1 billion company. And they just don't see that, there's a difference in just opinion, and there's a difference in the scale. So kind of have that in mind as well, and target the investors that that don't necessarily need $1 billion company. Like, you'll get funding from them way easier than the ones that need, based on your market, based on the where you are, etc. Big VCs and big US VC names are clearly very sexy, right? So Andreessen Horowitz invested in this company, Sequoia invested in that company, and that's completely fine. The reality, at least for us in Europe, is, and I've been seeing this for a number of years now, especially in London, is companies and CEOs say, "Oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to fundraise in the US," and with the thinking and with the thoughts of, oh, I'm going to go there for 2 weeks, I'm going to have some meetings, and I'm going to fundraise. And it's never like that. Like, unless you have a sales team in the US, unless you have an office in the US, unless you dedicate significant time as a founder, as a CEO in the US, where you'll spend 3 to 6 to 12 months, or even more than that, where you will relocate to the Bay Area or wherever, where the investor will be close to you, in order for them not to have Skype calls, because the personal relationship is way more important than any Skype calls, then that's not going to happen. You will go to the US for those 2 weeks, you'll lose and you'll burn cash, you'll have a nice time in San Francisco, sure, but you won't get anything done, because basically the cash doesn't travel. I mean, it does, but it doesn't travel in a way. All the investors want to be close to you. So they want to have a personal relationship with you. They want to get to know you better. They want to be, whenever you need them, they want to help you as much as possible. And that's the idea, right? Like, you don't, and even from your perspective, like, you don't want an investor who's going to be in another time zone, who will necessarily make you wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning just so you can have your call, right? Like, that's not necessarily helpful. So have that in mind as well. When they start to fundraise as well, they say, oh, I'm going to work out the amount later. And one of the first questions, I think, that all the investors will ask you in those initial meetings is, well, how much are you raising? And you don't need to have a really specific answer. You don't need to say, oh, I'm raising, or I need $475,300, right? Like, you can be like, oh, I need, I'm fundraising from, 500 to $1 million, or I'm raising a bigger seed round, right? And that's gonna be, like, people know what kind of that means, but you need to know what you're raising and what's gonna be the amount, because if you say, oh, I'm gonna raise, $3 million, then it's gonna be like, investor will say, well, based on what? Like, do you have the metrics? Do you have, who are your customers? What's your market? Who's in the team? Do you already have, senior people in the team, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure you know actually how much are you, how much do you need for that next milestone. And the way kind of to calculate that is, you need, if we take a step back, if we work backwards, then if you say you need 3 to 6 months to fundraise, then you probably want to have capital for at least a year that you can dedicate to the business, right? So from there, if you think about it, you have 6 months of fundraising, then a year of actually working on business before you need to start fundraising again, potentially, for those 6 months. So that will mean that that capital is 12 months plus 6 months. So pretty much everyone raises from 18 to 24 months for the capital that they need in the next 18 to 24 months. And that then depends on the on the KPIs that you want to hit, on the metrics, on the who you want to hire, who you need to hire, how much will that cost, potentially marketing spending and marketing acquisition, stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of know yourself. So know where your business needs to go, and know what's the cost that you need to what's the cost that you'll need to bear in order to get there. When they actually start to fundraise, there's a number of scraping services that you can scrape 1,000 emails, 1,000 VCs emails, and then you have 1,000 emails, and then you just go to Streak or whatever, and you say, oh, I'm just gonna I write my email, and that email is completely non-personalized except for the name. It's like, hey John, hey Marco, hey Michael, whatever, and then you write it, and then you click send, and 1,000 emails go out, and then probably maybe 5 come back saying, oh yeah, like, can you send me your deck, right? And that's the worst thing ever, I think, because the amount of emails that we get, that the investors get, random or non-random, is just, it's astonishing, right? Like, everyone is sending decks, everyone wants a meeting, everyone wants a call, everyone wants to, oh, can you fly out here to meet me? Right. And the challenge with that is a lot of those emails are cold emails, and there's only, unfortunately, 24 hours in the day, and we can't meet everyone, right? So what you kind of need to do, you need to find a warm intro. You need to find a warm contact. You need to find someone that I know, someone, from my example, it would be, 100 mentors, one of the 100 mentors that we know, one of the 100, VCs that I know personally, one of the contacts in my network that I really know, that I respect, that I listen to, and ask them, if you know them, to make an intro. Because if they say, hey Marco, I saw this company, they're doing X, Y, Z, you should really meet them, it's very gonna be unlikely that I'll say, oh yeah, like I really can't. So definitely go through through that middleman, through the network, because if you do, I mean, my email is going to be here, and we have some kind of context now. But if you scraped it from somewhere and you email me, I mean, I might reply, but it's likely that I won't, because I just won't have context. Like, you can be. It just wouldn't, like, there's just so much noise in the inboxes, it's very hard to reply to all. And also, always ask for a double opt-in, right? Like, always ask for that company, for that mentor, for that middleman to ask me if they can intro you to me rather than just do an intro. Because, again, think about the investors that are not equal. I might be the best investor in the world, but I just don't know biotech, or I just don't know games, and you're really doing games, so it just might be a waste of time for us to meet, because I'll never do the thing that you're doing. Like, I'll never invest in the thing that you're doing, because there's a clear mismatch. Also, so because of the CEOs say, I'll finish my fundraise in kind of 4 to 6 weeks, they also have the assumption that they will need to talk to 10 investors. And out of those 10, I'll find one, and it's gonna be great. The reality is the numbers need to be drastically bigger, right? So it's a big funnel. And this is an article from TechCrunch where they did, they saw, I think this is from PitchBook or somewhere, but it's basically they did an analysis on how many meetings do CEOs need to have in order to get to the next meeting, in order to get to a yes, in order to eventually close the round. And the numbers are, a certain CEO on average would contact 60 investors, then probably half of them would say immediately no, half of them would have some kind of a call, then from there, the investors, half of them would say again no, half of them would say yes, there would be a follow-on meeting, and after that you'd get probably to 5 people that say, oh yes, I'll really kind of commit, and then in the whole process of due diligence, probably 2, 3 will drop out, and you'll have your 2 that will actually do the round, right? So it's just a funnel, and it's a numbers game, right? Like, if you send 10 emails, if you reach out, if you have 10 calls, that's not a big enough number for you to actually kind of get down to the bottom of the funnel and close the round. Just an example, when we were fundraising for Techstars London, where we were raising our fund, so we use Streak. Streak is the Gmail, it's a CRM in our inbox, where we tracked the conversations that we had. So you can see kind of, there's 43 lead investors that we kind of had, then 2 meetings scheduled, 8 pitched, 8 soft committed, 15 hard committed, and they were moving through the phases, right? Like everyone at the beginning, like 100 or something like 100, were in the lead section, and then they kind of fell down through the phases. And you can then, see, this guy said, okay, so here's a potential for 100K. This guy committed 100K. Etc., etc., etc. So there's kind of details and how you can track these things. When you start to have, let me just look at the time.
About 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll be fast. Okay, so when you go through the first meeting, people say, oh, I'm just gonna go for a chat, and then you have a coffee, but it's never a coffee, right? It's not a random chat. You need to have your docs, you need to have your story ready and set for basically what you need to say and what your company does. So DocSend and Sequoia, they did basically how your a survey or basically research on how your docs, how your decks should look like and what they should have in order for you to kind of get kind of those meetings and make it meaningful. So have that ready. When you have that meeting, everyone's they want to take photos. Okay. There are going to be slides later, right, for everyone? Okay, well, let's share because I have literally a minute and a half and Bill will kick my ass. So when you have that chat, then investors say, oh, that's really interesting. Can you send me more? Can you send me details about what you're doing? And at that point, you will get your happy ears and you'll be like, oh, they're really interested. They really want to invest. They're really super excited. And that's never the case, right? Like they say, hey, can you send me your deck? That's really interesting what you're doing, but they have never committed in those sentences ever. They have never said, I will actually invest. So the reason, the thing to do is once you get to that point, you need to have a written commitment from the investors. You need to get them to a point where they actually write down and say, yes, I'm committed to investing X, Y, Z in your round. Because otherwise, everyone's interested, everyone wants to find out more, but then, and you feel great because, of course, you want to hear that everyone's interested, but that's far away from the actual commitments. Okay, 1 minute to go. Valuation is key. Yes, so people think, CEOs think that valuation is key, but if we go back to the actually how much are you fundraising, the key is to know how much do you need in order to get to your next milestone. And the industry kind of standards or the thing that will happen is the investors will ask for 15 to 25% of your company. So pretty much everyone, regardless of definitely in the early stages, you'll need to give away 15 to 25% of your company. And then if you know how much you're fundraising, then you can work backwards and see what your valuation might be. We'll share the slides, 47 seconds to go. And you also think because you're really desperate for money, you're really desperate for capital, that anyone can do, and anyone can be your lead investor. And I would strongly encourage you not to think like that, because you are building a company that will last, or that will need to last, probably for 5, 7, 10 years, and that's the average. Your lead investor will be a person that you'll probably be on calls with and in meetings with more than your significant other. And if you take anyone and you don't build that relationship, you might end up with a really shitty lead investor that will harass you, that will ask stuff that's not important, that will ask for just stupid things, that won't have the industry knowledge and the domain expertise that you might need for it. So make sure you know who you're getting the investment from. Okay, a few more. I need term sheets. Sure, you need term sheets, but you need commitments. So you'll get term sheets eventually, but what you need is you need commitments with a clear yes. Two more. People think it won't get in the way of running the business. People are like, yeah, I'm going to fundraise and I'm going to run the business and I'm going to hire and CEOs will be all over the place. This is a very just random chart that we created. So you will spend your life in those 3 to 6 months will be fundraising. Everything else will be pretty much on hold because that's the single most important thing at that point that you'll need to do. And it's just gonna happen. Okay, 15 seconds. Everyone's celebrations, so we talked about that. It's all in the news. You've celebrated, you've closed your round, and there's a massive party on a boat, kind of Wolf of Wall Street style. The thing is, so this is Marko Srsan, I think. It's often said raising money is not actually a success. It's just another milestone for a company that you need to have. I'll share the slides. 7 seconds to go, and have a backup plan. So that's kind of the call thing eventually. Like you might, even if you take all these steps, you might not actually succeed in fundraising because who knows? Maybe the market will crash and no one's going to fundraise. So you need to have a backup plan because basically the percentage or the ratio of companies that don't raise is massive. Raising VC is probably the easiest thing that you'll need to do. It's another Marko Srsan thing. Actually running the business and building it further and growing it is going to be way, way more painful. Some no's, 3 seconds. Some no's. These are the things that we hear often. So your company does not have competition. That's not true. Don't do tranche investments. Usually, tranche investments are investments that come in 2 parts or 3 parts, but 2 parts usually, and the second part usually never comes. You count on it, but it never comes through, and then you're kind of screwed because you need to figure out what to do if it doesn't come. Don't ask investors to sign the NDAs. The ideas are all around the place. Everyone has ideas. No one's going to steal your idea. The execution, the team, your domain knowledge is the thing that matters, and no one's going to sign the NDA. Don't do the jargon thing. So everyone's also doing something with artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's all over the place. But then when you actually dig into it, there's a kind of, a yes-no tree in it, a binary tree, rather than actual machine learning, so that's a problem. And then don't lie. What you have is what you've built, and be proud of it. Don't bullshit that you have 1,000 customers. It's a very small community, even though the startups are everywhere, but it is a very small community. And once your brand, once your reputation kind of goes out as a guy, as a lady that lied, everyone will know, and it's going to be a very tough position. So that's it. Hopefully, after all this, it will make it easier to actually fundraise. I'm Marko. Bill's going to kick my ass, and if you have any questions, this is my email. Reach out, and thank you so much for having me.
Okay. So, excellent. Well, let's thank Marko one more time. That was awesome. Way to go.